Well, I'm Bob Dickie, and welcome to another episode of Taking the Leap podcast. My guest today is my good friend, Vadim Belyakov. Vadim lives in Moscow, Russia, and has been a serial entrepreneur since 1999 when the ROST Group was founded. ROST's main activity was the importation and distribution of fast-moving consumer goods, FMCG, throughout the entire Russian Federation, and it quickly became Russia's leader in brand sales. In recent years, the company has shifted its focus to provide real estate development and back-office solutions to medium-sized multinational companies doing business in Russia. Vadim is also the president of Uniland, a trading company that distributes a wide range of products to the consumers in the Urals. He's also a member of YPO and has won multiple awards to include Best Regional Learning Officer, Best Large Personal Event, and Best Overall Experience. Vadim has his Master of Arts from the Russian Academy of Economy and is a graduate of the London Business School and Harvard Business School. Since 2017, he has been working on a special passion project, the NotAlone App, which is an application for young people who feel alone, depressed, and struggle with anxiety. The app uses innovative and life-changing technology like an AI bot, online forums, and over 20 years of established clinical psychological experience to provide users with a variety of strategies to meaningfully connect and deepen healthy and positive self-awareness. Now, this is where I would normally say, I know you're going to enjoy this conversation, so let's jump right in. But I actually want to take a moment to add my thoughts and some context to this conversation. This podcast has allowed me the opportunity to interview some incredible people with amazing backgrounds in unique locations all around the globe. Many of these are very close personal friends of mine. However, this interview was even more unique. Vadim was calling in from Moscow at the height of an open conflict where the Russian Federation is engaged in a special operation in Ukraine. I, on the other hand, am on the other side of the globe, and in many ways, due to my location and nationality, on the other side of this conflict. It was a bit unusual of a position to be in. As a former United States military officer in Knoxville, Tennessee, I was calling my good friend in Moscow, Russia, to talk about life, family, business, like we have done for many times for many years. This time, I was a little bit concerned about having this conversation. I was concerned about Vadim's safety. I asked him privately if he still wanted to do this. Would he be okay? Would he be safe? We have seen what happens to people in Russia who speak openly and may have different ideas or opinions not shared by the government. I had so many questions that I wanted to ask, and my apprehension and concern also might be because of some of the conversations I had had in the weeks and months leading up to this phone call on my end as well. This whole issue in the Ukraine was troubling me on multiple fronts. I watched as Western media and governments quickly came to very simplistic sound bites and narratives, and the public was supposed to just accept and parrot these back in conversations. I saw people paint with a really broad brush with statements like, the West is right, Russia is wrong, we're good, they're evil, without the willingness to talk about the nuance of the issue and ask if maybe there were other issues on both sides that needed to be addressed. I openly asked questions and debated some of my close military friends and officers that I served with and was met with almost disdain that I could even question the party line coming out of the Pentagon in Washington, almost as if I was un-American for asking a question or asking why we can't find an off-ramp to this conflict. Debating this issue and asking questions like, should we be concerned if this grows into a larger conflict, seemed like a logical question to raise. I saw politicians who were eager to get into this conflict and supply fighting and openly were not interested in finding resolutions. This seemed absolutely crazy to me. Where was the JFK of our generation trying to avoid this conflict and find a peaceful resolution? Some business leaders and politicians who knew the issues well and were students of history openly shared concerns, raised questions, and tried to force a public dialogue that this was not just about Russian aggression and the invasion of a peaceful country, but that NATO had crossed red lines and gone back on agreements that multiple U.S. administrations had given Russia. These administrations include the Reagan, Bush, and Clinton administrations, just to name a few. These all had been made to Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, mainly that NATO would not expand, NATO further to the east, closer to Russia's borders. Then, over the next 30 years, NATO did just that at an alarming rate. Robert Kennedy Jr., running for president of the United States, gave interviews every chance he could about the mistakes the West had made that led up to Russia finally invading Ukraine. Some of these issues include the U.S. involvement in the revolution in Ukraine, with U.S. politicians present in 2014 replacing a pro-Russian government with one that would be firmly controlled by the West. Watching leaders ask these questions and asking if the issue was maybe a bit more nuanced and complicated than it's all Russia's fault led these leaders to be quickly dismissed as misguided, un-American, and sometimes unpatriotic. I know similar debates and disagreements in Russia have been met with similar and even worse consequences. I am not a Putin apologist. It is a well-known fact what he has done to people who speak out against him and dissidents who have spoken out against him and his administration. For example, one dissident who was seeking refuge in London had FSB agents secretly place the chemical agent Novichok in his underwear, which ultimately led to his death. I mean, this is just savage. There are many issues on both sides to be upset about. What really upsets me today is that talking points and narratives seem to be issued from on high, and it is expected that everyone will just parrot these lines and agenda without asking any questions. In Russia, we have seen people protesting in the streets, be arrested by the police, and then disappeared. In the West, the silencing comes in different forms. Many of these issues that people want to discuss and have debate on obviously impact the lives of people across the globe. Most often we find the desires of those people, they just want to live in peace. They want to raise a family, enjoy life, make a difference in the world. And many times, those simplistic desires are at odds with the agendas of those who are in temporary seats of power. I have found that most often, people have far more in common than we have differences. And through friendships, dialogue, and respect, even complicated issues can be resolved. As I sit here this morning, it's hard to tell where the conflict in the Ukraine ends. I pray it does not continue to escalate, and I surely hope it does not become another 20-year war like the West just exited in the Middle East, with disastrous consequences and little achieved. I am hoping for a modern-day JFK-style leader on both sides to display leadership and courage to find a resolution and bring this conflict to an end. In the midst of this, I know most citizens on both sides of this issue are great people. Friends, family, business partners, all wanting to live in peace and to take care of their communities and families. The friendship I share with Vadim is just one example. Two friends, dare I say brothers, who have done life together, been informed together, laughed and cried with each other as we've shared stories about our life and our family and our journeys. And on this morning, we once again talk as friends, hoping for better times. I'm pretty sure that if those who were elected by people like us did the same, we could find similar friendships and understanding. I hope you all enjoy this conversation. Vadim, my friend, it has been a while since we've been able to communicate, and I am so honored and happy to have you on the podcast this afternoon. I've got so many questions to ask you. There's a lot of things that are going on. But for our listeners from around the world who are tuning in and listening to this podcast, where are you calling in from today?
Well, my business is in Moscow, and actually part of my family is I'm on second marriage now, living in Moscow. So basically, it's challenging situation, for me, for the family, for the whole country. And the reason why I'm still in Moscow actually is my business is here. I cannot just take my real estate I manage and move elsewhere. Yeah, although I'm big advocate of peace efforts and peace between Ukraine and Russia.
Right. Well, I remember you probably a few months ago, well, it's actually longer than that, when the conflict in Ukraine kicked off. YPO had a meeting with YPO members from all over the world, got on a Zoom conference call to kind of talk about it. And there were members, YPO members that were in Russia that were giving, insights of what was happening behind the scenes. There were YPO members that were in the Ukraine that were giving insights of what was happening on the ground there. And then we had various politicians and thought leaders that were giving some insights of, what do we think is unfolding? And I really want to spend the next few moments with you today on this podcast, just to get your insight and understanding, what you're seeing, your perspective, boots on the ground, if you want to use that terminology. Here you are, you're a business leader, businessman in Moscow. You have family in Moscow. You have family in London. We were just talking a few moments ago how it used to be a 3-hour flight to be able to get from Moscow to London to see your kids. And now that trip is much more arduous, maybe 15 plus hours as you're going through Turkey. But you are a close friend of mine. You're a classmate of mine. We're both YPO members. I greatly respect you. I've been able to get to know you over the past decade. We've spent time together in forum. Just letting you know that you're, not only do I consider you a close and dear friend, but I've watched how you've interacted with our classmates. You have one of the most giving and kind souls that I've ever met. You're so respected by all of our classmates, loved and revered. I know during the pandemic, one of the things that you were so concerned about was having connection with people, and you had your finger on the pulse that loneliness was really starting to take hold, and people were struggling with that globally. And you stepped into that space and were providing comfort and aid and helping connect people during the global pandemic. And so I want to say thank you for all that work that you've been doing, not only for our classmates in the YPO community, but the world as a whole. And I want to kind of shut up now and listen to you. So tell me.
First of all, thank you for long-lasting and deep friendship. I really admire you as a person, and I learned a lot from you, as everybody did at HBS. And thanks God, we have people like you there on the program, and you made me inspired to actually graduate this year after long 9 years of studies. And I guess it was just a rewarding experience. So thank you for being in the lead of the program. You made a remarkable job.
Oh, thank you, my friend.
Just to address a little bit the mental health side. Yes, it's probably and I'm happy, to disclose that information, that my 20-year-old daughter committed suicide 5 years ago. And since then, following her steps and her thoughts, I created 2 apps, one in the US and one in Russia, called NotAlone. Basically, that's the social network where people supporting to each other by peer-to-peer dialogue and forum groups with moderation, or just, as our YPO forum community. And it's been rewarding because we managed to save few lives, and I believe, whatever I can feel about my daughter's pass away, in a way, it's a start to something bigger than herself and myself and whatever. So she's on heaven, but she's still saving lives and doing good.
That's a true statement, my friend. And you continue to make a huge impact in all the various communities that you're participating in. So thank you for that. And I have family members and that deal with mental health issues. I've got friends who have dealt with mental health issues. It continues to be, I think, a growing challenge post-pandemic. Well, we could have a whole podcast on that in terms of, what are the causes, what are the reasons. It's such a great and deep need. I want to make sure to put your apps in the show notes and a link to various resources that you have out there for people who are, dealing with that, and also family members who are trying to help and support people who are having those challenges. Do you see in Russia, how has the conflict in Ukraine impacted people's daily lives? Has the stress level increased at all? Is it being talked about on the streets? I mean, here in the West, in the United States, it's frequently talked about in the news. We have podcasts that are talking about it. You have some people who are desperately trying to figure out, how do we have an off ramp? How do we end this conflict and bring peace? And there seems to be different circles of others who are like, they almost, here in the West, it feels like there's some who, I don't know, it's almost as if they're not wanting to end the conflict. I hate to say it that way, but I was literally on a YPO conference call the other day where a former 3-star general in NATO was giving an update, and I was a little bit dismayed maybe about some of the statements that he was making about the conflict. And I was like, wow, it does not feel like this individual is trying to off-ramp this conflict like a JFK type of leader, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm sorry for being wordy here, but I'm just, what's happening in Russia? What's the feeling and the sentiment?
Look, I'll start probably with mental health and anxiety and depression and these things, because actually I can track what's happening there. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's pretty much the same as with any cause of depression or anxiety. Our brain works kind of strange way. It's just trying to hide pain points and substitute that with something else. Mm-hmm. So when you're in the middle of uncertainty, you kind of react strongly on whatever. If we're talking about the war, like first few months, it was just overwhelming and people were speaking up, not everybody, but many. And some went to jail for that. And some actually were obliged to go to army, instead of going to jail. So that's what happened. But all the time, brain works the way that, okay, it's something there. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really touches me. Okay, I feel probably more anxiety than before. Will become uncertain. Quality of life is changing. Prices are increasing, and probably I haven't been able to pay my mortgage in some months. But the real cause of the problem is basically hidden. So in our social app, we don't see people talking about the war and what's related to that. It's now more kind of, personal stuff. But at the same time, I know a lot of psychologists, and their time is just fully packed, with appointments. And I have a few whom I know personally, and there are people with post-traumatic stress disease coming to talk to them. It's many people coming back wounded. I guess there are thousands of deaths, although we don't have any proper statistics on that from officials. The last number officially stated was 5,500 Russians been killed back in September.
That only 5,000 Russians had been killed?
Back in September. So since then, there's no update, and I believe it was pretty kind of exaggerated to the very bottom number. So I don't believe it, because at the same time I heard there were like 60,000 deaths from Ukrainians over that time. So, and I'm just kind of struck and shocked that many mothers and families who got body of their kid in the coffin, they do not react. They are not on the streets. They are not protesting. They're not putting their voice. And I don't know. I just can guess that probably families get money, like $100,000 for that event, let's say. And probably there is a clause, if they start talking, then probably they'll have additional consequences, financial, and maybe they can lose their freedom. So
do you feel safe talking about this conversation? I mean, I'm here in Knoxville, Tennessee. You're in Moscow. We're talking about a ongoing war and conflict in Europe, the largest conflict in Europe since World War II. Our two respective countries, although the United States is not actively involved in this war, we're supporting, right, the I guess conflict, or the Ukraine government and fighters. So in some respects, you and I are on opposite sides of the world, and our countries are on opposite sides of this issue. And we're talking on Zoom. I can't imagine, like, go back, to World War II, right? I can't imagine an American sitting, in Washington, D.C. or New York talking with, their friend or a German citizen in Berlin, right? About, hey, what's going on, right? It's really weird that with this technology, we're able to have these kind of conversations. But do you feel safe being able to, state your opinions and, what you think's going on as you sit there in Moscow?
Look, somebody should, at least,
Mm-hmm.
I will not kind of probably tough question of you. You're a good interviewer, actually. So, yeah, but honestly, when the war started, and I've been on a number of calls actually, and gave my opinion, and one of them was with HBS community from YPO. There were kind of 800 people on the call, and people were just texting me after the call. Hey, buddy, you have to stop. You have to kind of go down and, not to speak up and probably, just delete everything, what you said or what you wrote, because it's can just, you can end up in jail. Even now, using the World War in Russia is basically illegible, to lose your freedom easily. So, but honestly, I have friends in Ukraine, and my family is actually partially from Ukraine. Just before the war, in February 2022, February 17, 19, myself, my son, my daughter, and my son's girlfriend, and she's Ukrainian, we were sitting in Edinburgh and doing whiskey testing together. And they kind of asked me, you believe that there can be a war between the countries? And I, with all my naivety, said, no, I don't feel it. But at the same time, when the war started, and all the events started to popping up, and I have been regional chair for YPO Europe back then, and being Russian and being in the lead of the region, you need to take a stand. You need to take a decision what you're going to do. I mean, one of the options was to step down and say, okay, sorry guys, I cannot make it because of my personal safety and so on. Or you can just basically, do what you have to do. Take care of your members. On the first hand, about Ukrainian members, because situation was completely, I would say, drastic. There were bombs over Kiev and other cities, and people were just running out from the country to save their families, So what I could do, I could just get chapter chairs of Poland, Romania, Hungary, Germany, and activate them to just receive our members, and their families in their houses. And half of the Ukrainian chapter was accommodated thanks to this effort I brought. And I wouldn't say that I'm proud of that, but I had to do this. And I guess sometimes actions are much more important than just talking. And if I'll be jailed, not for what I'm talking about, I'll be jailed for what I've done.
I know that first call that we had as the conflict broke out and you were sharing what was happening, I too was getting text messages from our classmates, and we were talking about your strength and courage under fire, sharing information. And, I think all of us were concerned for our friends on both sides, right? We've got friends there in the Ukraine, and I think everybody wants to see peace and stability in Europe. We want to see business grow and flourish. We want to see business leaders be able to grow their businesses and serve their communities. And, that's what we want. It's unfortunate that we live in a world where, conflict pops up, and it's the citizens and the people that, pay the price when this happens. So I appreciate your leadership in Moscow and serving your community and chatting with people and doing the best that you can to continue to help people in need. That's always been, as I've known you, that's always been part of your heart and your willingness to serve and make a difference. How has life changed in the last year since this conflict has broken out? Are you seeing differences in life in Moscow? The businesses. I mean, I know we've seen a lot of American businesses that have left. We've heard about extremely draconian sanctions that have been levied not only on Russia but also on various leaders within Russia. Do you have the ability to leave Russia and travel around Europe and into London and in the United States? I mean, just tell me how life is different.
Okay. Well, sanctions made kind of multiple negative effect on businesses and people in general. And actually, last March 2022, I flew out from the country and had a few meetings in Europe and then leadership meeting of IPO in Dallas. And suddenly you find yourself in the situation where that your credit cards are not working. So, I mean, fortunately, YPO is a very strong community, and back then I was in Egypt, and a friend of mine just gave me a pail of cash, and I could continue my travel.
So your credit cards just literally stopped working?
Just MasterCard and Visa just withdrew probably March 9 or March 10 from the Russian business, so all the Russian countries are still working inside of Russia, but you cannot pay with them elsewhere. So that's actually puts some pressure, additional pressure that traveling became kind of nightmare, and Russian airlines are banned from traveling to many destinations now, and so we don't have many direct flights from Europe. Probably Serbia, the only destination where you can travel with Serbian Airlines. And if you want to do some, European trip, it will last probably the same way for me as to go to Boston or Bangkok, same hours. So, but it's just like cherry on the pie, in fact, because for usual citizens, it's not about travel. It's not about their business. It's about surviving. And I see that the inflation has tremendous effect with people buying locally, but everything more or less linked to Western supply, whether it can be food for animals or whatever. So Russia doesn't have everything, to just take care of its own economy. Mm-hmm. And that's been kind of difficult for many, because ruble depreciated, then it got up, and then it's back down again. So pre-war it was like 60, now it's around 75. At some point of time it was 120. And people, of course, feel it, because importation is still a big chunk of the what we have on our table. Impossible to buy any Western cars except Chinese and Koreans. Yeah, I mean, it's challenging time, but I remember one of the lectures at HBS, and professor said that Russians kind of in the dilemma of choosing between TV set and refrigerator. So basically, if you have less in refrigerator but strong TV propaganda and so on, Russians would vote for TV. So unless the refrigerator becomes completely empty, not the case. So I guess what Western media is referring to, that Putin has majority support from Russian citizens, is actually accurate. People are still choosing TV.
Mm-hmm. So right now, the basic supplies that people need to live and subsist are still there, but there's inflation, maybe some challenges, but life seems to be going on somewhat as normal. But with obvious challenges, and you're in Moscow. So do you get a sense of the surrounding areas, other parts of Russia, where life would be similar to what you're experiencing in Moscow, or could it be different? Do you feel is Moscow more? I've heard. I'll just say this. I've heard that Moscow's being maybe a little bit more insulated, and maybe in other parts of the country the issues could be maybe a little bit different, but I'm just curious, is that something that we're hearing in the West, or is that accurate or inaccurate?
It is actually, because wages in the regions are simply like twice less than in Moscow. And real estate prices are basically stay untackled. When your food supply is 20-30% more expensive, and you have like $500-$600 a month of your salary, it hurts. It hurts. Probably, you touched a little bit on Russian businesses, and I should also say a few things about being Russian and how it feels.
Yeah, please.
In a way, if even you strongly oppose the war, and that's basically put everybody in frustration. People were leaving Moscow and Russia, trying to find second home somewhere else, in Dubai, Cyprus, other countries. And in many destinations, those people, and actually I felt the same way, you feel being alienated. People judge you on your passport, on your nationality. So the compliance process in the banks became just nightmare on the West. So to pay for schooling of my kids, sometimes it takes like a couple of months to get money transferred, and not because of Russian position and Russian bank system, but because of compliance from my bank over there. And same with visas, same with many other stuff, and I guess it put lots of frustration and pain into our heads. You're against, but somehow you feel like complete refugee with your Russian identity, and we judged not for our actions, not for our position, but for belonging to country which started the war.
Yeah. Well, I've never been in your particular situation, so I can't say that I 100% understand it, but I feel like I do have empathy for you and the plight that you're currently in. And it is sad, because I think a person should be judged by their character, by their actions, not being painted with a broad brush because of actions by somebody outside their control. Areas where I've experienced that as a U.S. citizen, there are times where I've traveled abroad globally, specifically in Europe, where if we've had some unpopular presidents in the United States that were not seen very favorably by European countries. And I remember traveling to, London and Switzerland and Italy, and having some very interesting conversations with people there who were very upset with me. And it was because it's like, well, I don't like your president. I don't like what you guys are doing. I'm like, hold on a second. I'm not the president. I'm a U.S. citizen. Actually, I may agree with you on some of these issues, right? But please don't paint me with a broad brush, just because, right? But it's unfortunate that that's how society is, where people can get categorized and put into a box based on things that are completely outside their control. Do you have? So I have a great deal of empathy for you, and I know that was something that you were talking about in our earlier conversations with our YPO friends and HBS community, explaining your positions, and I could tell that there was a great deal of stress as you were navigating this difficult situation. Do you feel that, like, the expat community, right? So Russian expats around the world that are living in various locations, you're hearing from them that they're feeling kind of maybe ostracized by those local communities, whether they're living like in Cyprus or Greece or Latin America, Africa. There's stress and strain for them as a expat community outside of Russia because of what's going on.
Look, nothing like that happening on the personal level. So people just accept you for what you are, for who you are, actually, not for what you are. And it's a big discovery, because I really thought that it might be like somebody listening a Russian speech on the streets in London, and straight away you would just get attacked, and people would be seeing you as murder or whatever. But nothing like that happens.
Mm-hmm.
All the pain and all the actions against Russians are made by institutions, banks, companies. And Russians allowed, for example, to buy only 300 euros worth goods in the shops in Europe. So it's like maximum, and it's part of how you call it, sanctions. Yes, sorry, the word. So on personal level, no. I mean, who were my friends before the war? They're still my friends.
Mm-hmm.
I sense the same from people living in Turkey and Dubai and other places. And it's a pity, that we're facing this situation, which was just unimaginable, and just beyond our understanding. Would you like to hear about Russian businesses in Russia, how they doing now?
Yeah, let's go there. That's would be a great topic. And then I'd also like to hear about. I've got a couple questions regarding the start of the conflict and viewpoints there, right? And what we feel, what you feel, what does the Russian population feel were some of the trigger points that led to this? And are we able to find an off ramp between our two countries? What is the word on the street on where peace could be found? What is a workable solution from the Russian perspective on where there could be peace and an off ramp? And so we can get into that, maybe secondarily, but I'll share that with you right now. And if you want to go into business, we can do that.
Well, whatever you prefer. Okay, let's just finish with business side, and for you just to understand better kind of actual environment in the country.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
As you mentioned, kind of probably half of international companies left the country or on the way of living and closing the businesses. And actually, it's played kind of very unbalanced role for Russian businessmen.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you have like top three market share leaders in the country living, and you company number 4 and number 5. So out of the blue, you're just getting the major market share in the country. So your business is just pumping up like crazy.
So it's actually been good for some Russian businesses. All the global competition leaves, and you're 4 or 5, and now you're number 1. And so it could be a huge boon for certain sectors.
Exactly. And surprisingly enough, I mean, I have still few expats living in Russia and managing being CEO of international businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, for them, it was a record high year in terms of profit and sales numbers. And they kind of rethinking of their position on the speed, how quickly they have to leave the country. Mm-hmm. It's just amazing year in terms of profits, sales, everything. Zero marketing expenditure. So your bottom line is just not light green, but dark green. So that's what happens. Yeah. But for some Russian businesses, of course, the demand is changing, and probably about 1 million Russians are living abroad, those who are kind of wealthy, and they doing they're spending most of the money on real estate and luxury goods and so on. So these sectors would be in bigger trouble. And so that's basically, the picture. So business is there, and business is balancing, trying to accommodate whatever was before shipped from US or elsewhere or Europe, now coming from China, India, or other places. So business goes, just additional margins, additional prices increasing, and that's it.
So there's not, from your perspective, there isn't a crisis, a business crisis within Russia that would be putting pressure on the government in any way, shape, or form. Actually, businesses are performing quite well. Profits are up. Competition is down. Even with some of the sanctions and things like that, Russia has enough trading partners, specifically with China and others, to be able to get raw materials and keep the economy going.
Look, I never thought that Russian economy would be that much resilient.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, it's the case now. So, of course, on long term, Russia will kind of degrade slowly in terms of technology, new kind of products, and so on. But it's not happening quickly. It's a long time process. So, Microsoft, IBM, and others, they left the country, but it will take years probably for Russia to have to fill this handicap on technology. It will matter, but it will matter not now. It will matter in the years to come, and that's, for me, was a great surprise. I didn't think that Russian finance and economy would tolerate with that. So, yeah.
It was actually a little bit surprising for me months after the conflict started. I think there was a lot of predictions that the ruble would be under enormous pressure and crisis, and actually it strengthened dramatically. And it seemed like some of the moves that Putin had taken prior to the conflict to try to insulate from maybe sanctions that might be coming, right, had actually worked. And I was stunned at how well the Russian currency was doing. Are you able to speak into any of that, any insight on why?
Yeah, and look, when the war started, of course, it was a shock. And basically, everybody just went to buy dollars and euros. And that's why the exchange rate just doubled within first 10 days of war. But to your comment on Russian being prepared for possible sanctions, I'm not. I don't really agree with that. Because 350, I guess, billions of Russian reserves were somehow kept in banks in Europe, Switzerland, and US, and they got frozen. So if, let's say, they would be really preparing, they would probably make steps well before, yeah. But then what's actually happened, the central bank said, okay, let's balance supply and demand. So importation is under pressure, and at some beginning of the war, importation dropped down by 70% in the first 3 months. So country just didn't need that much currency. And who's buying currency? Mainly importers. So that's why they just didn't do anything artificial. They kept supply and demand balanced. Mm-hmm. We saw that importation started to increase by the end of the summer and in the fall, and then ruble just started to devalue back. There's no magic there. Mm-hmm. What they did, actually, they started to trade with some neighboring countries in local currencies, like with China and India and so on. And again, it's put down a bit of pressure on dollar and euro. And now on stock exchange, actually, trade RMB is higher than in dollars.
Wow, that's amazing. So let's maybe pivot to the conflict when it got started. I think both you and I have a similar position. We heard in the news, and there was some tensions. There were troops that were on the border. I think it was classified as a military drill. The United States has military drills all over the the world, and we heard that there were some tensions there. But my theory when I was chatting with people, like, nah, they're going to figure out. Our politicians, our diplomats are going to figure out how to have peace. We're not going to have conflict. This is we're going to have smart people sit down in a room. We're going to come to a resolution. We're going to come to an agreement. So I was shocked when hostilities broke out, and I think you said too, you were surprised. There was a lot of the Russian people were surprised. Do you have a sense on, or what is the average man or woman on the street in Moscow? What's their understanding of how this all started and why it started? Is there a general sentiment of, like, the Russian people say, here's why this conflict or hostility started?
So, as you said, you have like your source of information on the West, and it's like one-sided traffic, and same happening here.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you would just stop somebody on the streets, you'll hear something like that NATO was at our doors, and if we wouldn't hit first, probably they would do it before us, and the war would be not on Ukrainian territory, but on Russian territory.
Mm-hmm.
There were like lots of promises made, never got executed, and so Russia had to hit first.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the understanding from Russian media. The reality is probably different,
mm-hmm.
but at the same time, it's all about personality of Mr. Putin. Probably many people aware of his background, being and working in secret services for many years. So I guess his mindset is just conspiracy theory, and what he actually admitted in the Russian TV, that he learned the lessons from Leningrad streets when he was a kid. If you've been kind of under threat, you start by hitting first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he did. And why it's happened, I mean, there are lots of articles about that. Probably I shouldn't repeat. But when you constantly repeated that you're a bad guy, you're kind of evil, in the end, your last position is being back by the wall, where mm-hmm. you can just make another step back.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess his decision was, okay, if I'm that bad, take it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about not just like last few months, but probably years since 2008, when Putin was trying to get everybody at the same table and start the kind of discussing the state of the global community and world. And it's not about hegemons, but everybody should be heard.
Mm-hmm.
Gradually, it just became old way propaganda, which we heard during Iron Curtain times of Soviet Union, US. Simple position. You just pick the enemy and you pick on him, and you win your elections in your country. Yeah. You need external enemy to be a strong leader, and that's what happened. And same on the same sides, same happened in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I remember Trump elections, and actually probably had never had this understanding that Trump will win.
Mm-hmm.
So the media was against Hillary Clinton,
mm-hmm.
and what she was talking about, and that she treats Russia as a bad power and so on. So when Trump won, and all the media was saying that Trump is a great guy, amazing guy, he's a friend of Putin, saying good words on Putin.
Mm-hmm.
They had to shift back, from this idea of Trump being friend to Trump being enemy,
right.
and US being kind of playing big brother and saying Russia what to do.
Mm.
So it's not really kind of direct, probably, to your question. What's the ideas behind of Putin starting the war? But I guess it gives you a little bit of glimpse on how he could proceed all these events.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting to hear people's perspectives on what they're seeing, sensing, what they think about a particular issue. And as you alluded to a little bit earlier, said, hey, truth is probably somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of differing opinions on this particular topic, and here in the West, I've been listening to two different camps talk about this issue. And there's a group of people, some politicians, business leaders, who have openly been questioning some of the steps that the West had taken post 1991, when you had the former Soviet Union and the bloc kind of dissolve, and we had the new Russian Federation form, right? And I think it was President Clinton had made some promises to Yeltsin, if I'm not mistaken, that NATO was not going to expand. And I think around that time, Russia had been making overtures to Europe and wanting to join NATO and have stronger alliances and partnerships, which were rebuffed. And then slowly, so this is the argument. This is the point of view for a group of people.
Yeah, that's actually started with Gorbachev and I guess Bush during the Berlin Wall story. So there were talks between them, and verbally Gorbachev was promised that NATO will not expand. But
then NATO started expanding eastward, and to the point where now I'm not sure if you've read the author Peter Zeihan, but he gives some points about hey, there's certain Russia considers certain territories an existential threat to the homeland of Russia on their borders, and so he explains that in great detail in a couple of his books on why the territories of, say, like the Ukraine are so strategically of importance to Russia. And so these people, people who are in this camp will argue these points and say, hey, there were promises made. And, from the Russian people perspective, they might be asking, well, why does NATO continue to grow? Why does it need to continue to go eastward? And, these were provocative steps that are, to your point a second ago, you said, maybe pushing, Putin into a corner, or, feeling like maybe he needed to strike first. Then there's others on the other side. There was that NATO commander who was giving a talk just this last week, and he had a different point of view, as you might imagine. And his point of view was, people need to have freedom to decide, where they want to ally, and if some of these former territories of the Soviet Union wanted to join NATO, they ought to be able to have self-determination and join. And that there were, conflicts in, say, Syria, where we had, there were red lines drawn in Syria, and, various things that were happening, and maybe in Georgia and others, where his opinion was where Russia had been an aggressor. Nobody had really, stood up and said no. And so finally, his point of view, they had to draw a red line in the Ukraine, and we've got to defend this territory. So you've got two radically different points of view on how this started and the reasons for it starting. And I'm sitting as a bystander, saying, okay, well, how do we find common ground to end it? Where's the common ground where two sides could get together and say, let's not continue this conflict? Where's the off ramp? Do you get a sense on, I hate to put you on the spot and say, well, which side's accurate, or is truth in the middle, or give me your perspective as a Russian citizen sitting there in Moscow, how you think and feel. I want to understand how you process the information that's been put in front of you.
Look, at HBS we had a course on negotiation, and there was a term which is ZOPA, Zone of Possible Agreement, and nothing like that now exists. So probably there was a window of negotiation opportunities in the beginning of the war. Ukrainians were frightened, Russians were attacking very fast, and Ukrainians were eager to sign peace agreements with annexation of a few territories.
Crimea being one of them. Is that the key territory?
Yeah, and there was a document actually negotiated, but not signed by Ukrainians at the end. And that was the only moment of time when it could finish quickly and with less damage to the infrastructure and less people being killed. nowadays it's just two different stands. So for Russia, for Putin, it's okay, give me the territories which I already took, which actually by Russian constitution already part of Russia. So I want to keep this, and then we can negotiate a peace agreement and stop the war. I guess for Zelensky, it's just impossible agreement. Again, we were on one of YPO events with negotiator from Russian side with Ukraine, and he said that Zelensky is not the only power-taking decision in Ukraine. It's also about whom Putin and Russian propaganda calls Nazis, Azov, and US. So if one of them has not agreement to what's been proposed, it will never happen. And I guess for Zelensky is to admit that these territories are no longer Ukrainian territory. Just a disaster as politician, as a country leader, and as for the country future, it will just I would say probably will solve short-term issues, but Ukraine as a whole will be always feeling this country put down on their knees, and will never be able to get up from there. Me being like a Ukraine president, I would just continue. Obviously, to me, there's no win on the battlefield for Ukraine. Probably there is a chance for Russia to win if Russia wants to do that, because big reserves on the weapon and people, manpower, and so on. So if Russia will decide to win, it can. But what's the consequence of this? I mean, you conquered the big territory with 40 million people who basically will hate you. How you can just onboard them, how you can live with them, what you're gonna do. I mean, so I don't see any good scenario for any party in this conflict at all.
Yeah.
But I guess as this ZOPA doesn't exist, everybody is just playing same thing. They just continue to fight and continue killing each other before some event might happen, and then it will change the current situation and balance, and will be a silent discussion, which doesn't exist now.
I remember that term ZOPA, zone of possible agreement. So you're saying that early on there was an opportunity, there was a zone where there could have been some type of mediation, but where we're at right now, and this is what concerns me, is because I've been seeing this from where I'm sitting, my perspective. It's just like, man, it feels like Russia's going all in, Ukraine and the West is going all in. It doesn't seem like there is this a potential for mediation here, because both sides. I believe Biden has made the statement, President Biden and President Zelensky. It's like, we're not giving up Crimea, right? And then Putin has said, oh no, this is Russian territory. And I mean, it's like, it doesn't seem like there's any willingness to have a discussion on how do we off ramp this. And that, I don't know, that's just really, really concerning for me.
Some people saying
it feels like it's a total war, right? And total war in one area, we've seen a total war in one area. It's hard to contain that. It ends up kind of spreading, and that's how we got involved in World War II, because it spread.
The same with World War I and many other conflicts. And I hope it won't be the case, because it's going to be just disaster for the whole mankind. Everybody, at the table have a nuclear weapon, and I hope it won't happen, and our kids, will inherit still the planet, which probably when we started our lives, you and me, we were hoping to give better future for our kids and better understanding, and never repeat the mistakes of our parents and grandparents. But here we are. We just giving to our kids lots of uncertainty, lots of problems and conflict, which if even it will stop, the Ukrainians and Russians most probably will never, get together as friends.
Well, let me ask you this question. I just want you to be able to go on the record with your feelings and statements on this. One of the things that I've heard it discussed, especially by this general officer who was giving this presentation here recently, that an argument for why this conflict needed to be vigorously defended by the West was that Russia has aims to continue to take back all the previous territories, satellite states, countries, and reform. That's what is being said. Like, Putin has a design of reforming the former Soviet Union, and if we don't stop here, then it's going to be Poland's going to be next, and all these other territories and so forth, right? And there's smart people on the other side of that argument who's like, no, hold on a second. That's never the case. They don't have designs. Do you, on that particular motivation, do you have a sense from, I know you can't read the mind, obviously, of President Putin, but of the Russian people, is that plausible that could potentially be a motivating factor? You're just like, Bob, that's ridiculous. There's absolutely no way.
Look, I just can guess here. So the Ukraine would be given up as easy as Georgia and other places as Crimea. Then, probably you feel that it's easy. You can do whatever and you'll never get any strong response on your actions. So, and it's just part of motivation to go forward. But I guess with what we're experiencing in Ukraine, it's no longer the agenda of Russia and Putin to continue. I guess the situation is so complex and complicated that it's already something which might end the political regime in Russia one day or another.
Well, one of the things that concerns me about the particular conflict is when labels, or any conflict, right? Any disagreement, is when there are labels of, well, this person is evil or this side is evil, right? And a lot of times you see that. We saw it in World War II. Both sides were trying to paint the other side as these are the evil people, right? And when you do that, it's really hard to come to a negotiation table and say, hey, let's figure out how we can have peace, because you don't want to have peace with somebody or a side who you believe is evil. You want to have total domination and total win, right? And so you said earlier that Putin had been painted by the West and seen as somebody who might be evil or a bad person, and both sides, right? We're hearing that, and Zelensky and people in the Ukraine are being painted as, well, that they're Nazis, and right. And so for me, when I look at a conflict like this, where I find hope, where I see a possibility, is when people like me and you can sit down and have a conversation. And what I'm hopeful is that our diplomats, our politicians can come to the table and not see the other side as evil, but try to have empathy and try to see the world through their eyes, their perspectives, and say, hey, what are their concerns? What are their needs? What are the issues that are important to them? And can I put myself in their shoes and, have empathy for their point of view? And then how can we see the best in the other person and then say, hey, let's come to the table and see each other as human beings. One of the things I've always enjoyed about our class and our classmates is that we have so many different. It's truly a melting pot of people from around the world, different ethnicities, different beliefs, different religions, vastly different experiences. But I always walk away from our class realizing that regardless of all of our differences, we actually have far more in common than we have differences. And I may have a different point of view. I may have a different worldview on a particular issue, but I've actually got a lot more in common with people in my class than I have differences. And I think that's what we need to get some people in a room who can see the good and the humanity in the other person, and come with open arms and be like, hey, let's talk, as opposed to who's right, who's wrong, and I'm gonna just like, my side's just gonna try to win 100% win. And it's just like, it doesn't seem like it's gonna work. What do you think?
You're opening another discussion which might take us for another 30 minutes of talks. Actually, you don't see people of size and human values of Nelson Mandela these days. Somebody who really can, sacrifice himself and not having this agenda of being re-elected no matter what. Mm-hmm. Being populistic and promise, and then sometimes, and most of the times, not delivering. Mm-hmm. So this would happen if we would have such caliber of leaders with such mentality as you described in Russia, in the US, and other important destinations, China, India. I just don't believe that we have possible Nelson Mandela here. Mm-hmm. We're all about populism. We're all about staying in the power no matter what. About votes, about getting new elections won. So we're not thinking, not us, but political leaders long term. We're not. Sometimes, I guess the value of human life is just zero. Costs nothing for them. So one man take a decision to move his troops to neighboring country, which would lead to hundreds of thousands of deaths between civilians and military. Can you justify that you had a threat, you had this or that, that you've been painted by a thick brush? Mm-hmm. Just unimaginable. It's 21st century, and we are actually acting as what Yuval Noah Harari explained in his book *Sapiens*. Humans are the most dangerous, and I would say dangerous animals on the planet. Mm-hmm. We're killing each other for not food, not for means to survive, but for ideology, or something which you cannot touch, money, influence, not for protecting even your people. Mm-hmm. You send them to war.
Yeah. Well, it's sad.
I hope we've done badly, our generation, that our kids will learn from these mistakes, and people like Nelson Mandela and other type of human values will prevail on this planet. And it's another big topic, how we should get there, what we need to put, as education, as core values of our people, for leaders to be able to lead with these values and dignity and passion, and not with, another agenda, more personal, more egoistic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I don't want to speak for you, but tell me if I'm accurate here. But I know in the West, it feels like talking points that are somewhat sanctioned and the approved talking points. And when you differ from these talking points, people are like, hold on a second, Bob. You're a former military officer. You served in the United States Air Force. And, Russia has been our adversary for, seen as an adversary for, these, during the Cold War and whatnot. And you're supposed to have this party line, right? You're supposed to be, these are the talking points that you should be having. And when people differ from some of these talking points, you can feel the backlash from that, right? And as a student of history, I've read and studied how countries will have certain points of view that it's like once conflicts or certain things happen, it's like, this is how we want, through the propaganda machines, right? This is how we want people to think and operate, the things we want them to say, because this is going to help us, achieve these strategic objectives for this particular country, United States, China, whoever the case may be, England, Germany back in the day, and even Russia, right? So, and I think that anytime when people break out of those narratives, they feel that pushback. And I'm hopeful. I know that you are a proud Russian. You love your country. You love your heritage. I'm a proud American. I love my country. I love our heritage. I love, the history and things that, we've accomplished. And we can both be proud citizens of our country and love our country and love our people, and also still be patriotic and say, you know what? I love my brother halfway around the world. And one of the things that I commit to you is that as I'm sharing and talking with people I'm coming in contact with, I'm not going to espouse the stereotypes and the narrative that I think entities would want me to, but I'm going to share what I know about Russia, which is I know the Russian people, my classmates, my YPO counterparts that my friends in Russia that I have made over the years. You guys have been some of the most generous, loving, kind, incredible people. And when I think of Russia, that's what I think of. I think of you, and I think of our classmates. And I'm making sure that everybody that I come in contact with knows that. And I'm going to fight the narrative that folks would want to try to espouse that I don't believe is true. And that puts me in an unpopular position. And I know you probably feel the same way about our classmates around the world. But I think that's the way we make change.
100% agree with you, Bob. And thank you for your kind words and again, friendship, and for everything you're doing to put, something on the table for us to discuss and make our own opinions on the conflict. I believe that iron curtains are built in our brains by propaganda. It's no longer physical walls, but something in your brain which kind of stands somewhere and puts you in the position to judge rather than remember good years of history and the war, like good 20 years when Russia and US were truly trying to collaborate and partner from mid of 80s till beginning of early 2000s. And it was a perfect example for me. I mean, its future was, I was young back then though, but I felt lots of hopes, lots of prosperity, lots of freedom, and hope that we getting to something different, to another level of collaboration, to another level of problems which we might face as humans. We would be just leaving all these things, confrontation and so on behind, and we'll focus on something more peaceful, on doing life of our people greater. But in the end, propaganda did their job, and we back to the roots. And I believe these are not the roots. Roots are to partner and to prosper and to get bigger than just creating conflicts in order to get votes and get additional influence or protect your influence. So yeah, and people like us were there at least, probably not to have a strong word and make decisions, but we are kind of barometers of what's going on. And if we start arguing, then propaganda won. If we break our friendships, they won. But you need good, healthy seeds for harvest to grow one day. I guess it's business people. It's people like you and me and many people you mentioned.
Yeah.
So I hope we will be harvesting not on the different sides of the wall, but the day will come and we'll be able to hug each other personally and not
Yes. My prayer is the conflict ends as quickly as possible and we can get back to rebuilding and having positive impact in the world, and that you and I can see each other once again. Like you said, we can give each other a big hug, share an incredible meal. I tell you what, one of my favorite things every single year that you would come and we would have class together. You brought the best beluga caviar and oh gosh, some of the most incredible food. I was like, you are always so generous, and you just like bring a huge suitcase of the most exquisite caviars and vodkas, and we certainly you taught us what it was like to be a Russian, to celebrate Russian style. I'll never forget that. So, as we close up here, I've got two more questions for you. For people who might be wanting to learn more, maybe get different perspectives, read accounts of maybe what's going on, or to have a better understanding of maybe, the Russian people and some of the things that you guys are thinking about and discussing. Are there places that they could go and read? Are there books that people could, that you would recommend and say, hey, this is a great book that gives some insight or context on some of the ways that we think and we believe and so forth?
Well, first of all, I guess all the Russian members of YPO are there to reach out and, get their point of view. Probably some of them will be different than mine. Mm-hmm. But certainly it's like part of the network which should be used, us as YPOers to get knowledge on the situation. Reading. During this year at HBS, Ravi Abdalal made a case on Ukraine. Mm-hmm. I really deeply admire him as a really balanced and thoughtful and visionary professor. Mm-hmm. So it's part A, part B, part C, and I guess probably he's writing now part D, if not E already. Wow. So it gives you a lot of underlining thoughts and mise en place to this conflict from medieval centuries to these days, and how Ukraine was formed and so on. I'm happy to share with you. I don't know if I'm breaking Harvard rules, but
we'll put a link in the show notes where people can go and purchase that if they would like to get in-depth historical context. And Professor Abdallah is a savant. This individual, one of my favorite Harvard Business School professors, and is deeply rooted and understands Europe, specifically Russia, and his insights. I can't, he's been amazing in the past. I can't wait to read this particular case of his.
So to me, it's again very balanced and very thoughtful and very wise. Highly recommended.
That's great. That's a great resource for anybody who wants to dig deep, and we'll put that link in the show notes where people can go out there and get that. All right, final question. I've been asking this of our classmates that are here in the U.S. and even those who I've interviewed in Canada. But I'm going to take I think this is going to be extra meaningful for us at the moment. But you as a Russian citizen in Moscow, let's pretend that President Biden has invited you to the White House, and he is going to give you the microphone and allow you to address the American people, the State of the Union address. That's what we have here in the U.S. This has been the question, but I know it's going to be maybe a little bit challenging for you because of everything that's going on. But let's pretend that was happening. What would you say to the American people? Do you have a message that you would want to share with the American people, or what would be on your heart if you had that opportunity?
It's my actually favorite question to forums when I just meet people first. You have a mic, 30 minutes, and you can address the whole world. So probably if I would speak to Americans, the whole world would hear that. And my message is actually already was framed by you, and my strong beliefs in different future for our kids and for us. And there's not only money as super value in this world. We need empathy. We need inspirational and serving leadership.
Mm-hmm.
We need people not to play these games of politicians and believe in only common evil, but try to find these connections to build proper, better future where we think of intergalactic flights and go beyond of what we have now. And I believe that the war is just something unimaginable. It's something which we have to stop. Cost of life, and my life is nothing. If I would be there to sacrifice my life and to stop this war, I wouldn't even think for a minute. So unfortunately, I don't have good answers in response how to do that. But I truly believe that future is bright, and let's not use nuclear weapons, no matter what. It should be just banned.
Is that a concern for you?
It is. It is. It is concern, and we're all getting to the age where we process things differently, where we have less and less to lose. We think of, some people tend to think about their ego and not about humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope it's not the case, and I hope it won't happen.
Man,
but it's a concern. When you have a red button next to you, sometimes you can get tempted, and we start with mental health and suicides. And unfortunately, it's not the rare case. Again, sorry for getting back to that, but after my daughter's death,
mm-hmm.
I'm thinking a lot about suicide and what leads to that. One shocking number, and it was 2014 article from World Health Organization on suicide prevention. 800,000 deaths from suicide a year on the planet. So we shouldn't think of mental health diseases as something random and rare.
It's all around us.
And you see pilots crashing the planes and other things. I mean, you never know what kind of suicide one can choose for himself.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've given us a lot to think about. And I just want to say thank you for your time today, your insight, being courageous to call in and have this conversation. And certainly, you know how much I love and respect you. Certainly miss being able to spend time with you in person, but it's encouraging to be able to, through technology, see you halfway around the world, and you're sitting in your office there, and it looks like the sun's out there in Moscow, and beautiful backyard behind you. And I wish we were better days where I could either have you here at my home and have a Tennessee barbecue on our back deck, or we could be having what do you have in Russia? Do you guys have the South Africans have a braai? Do you guys have a braai or barbecue? What do you have something along those lines there in
we have everything, and I'd love to get to this occasion sooner than later.
Do it.
So we'll start with vodka and caviar.
Let's do it. Let's do it. I'll bring the barbecue. You bring the vodka and the caviar, and we'll have a mashup of Russian and American cuisine, and we'll have a great time. We'll solve the world's problems. How about that? Let's do it.
And my apologies to your listeners for my English is not perfect, and probably I'm one of the first in your podcasts where they have to really kind of figure out what this guy is talking about. But my heart is speaking for myself, and my heart is for peace, and my heart is for freedom, and people prosper and not die.
Well, your heart came out loud and clear, Vadim, and I will tell you that your And people will see one of the jokes in our class is that Vadim looks like James Bond. He is definitely a 007. He looks like who's the last one? It's what's the guy's
Daniel
name? Daniel Craig. Yes, and you are a striking image of him. And so to my James Bond brother in Moscow, Vadim, I love you, brother. Thank you for your time. This has been enjoyable. We've talked about tough issues, but the only way that we solve tough issues is by having tough conversations and people leaning in and trying to, through love and empathy and understanding and building friendship. Right? We've got to build relationships and friendships and see the world through new other perspectives, and that's how we can solve some of these things. So I appreciate all the work that you're doing there, my friend.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you again for increasing awareness and deleting this propaganda bias. We, at least between us, business leaders, should stay connected and have conversations, with argumented conversations.
Absolutely. Well, God bless you, my friend.
Thank you.
Today's episode was engineered by Mitch White with graphic and marketing by Tristan Dickie. Special thanks to my good friend Vadim Belyakov for taking time to be with us. Thank you for spending time with us today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. We look forward to spending time with you again.